There you go. Hello, it looks like we're live. Welcome, people, to this meeting on law and rule of law and law enforcement in France. My name is Phil Butland. I'm the speaker of the Link Internationals group, which is organising this meeting. I'll talk you a couple of things. We have two speakers, one of whom isn't here yet. Daniele Obono, who's a French MP, who is currently very busy. There's been racist pictures of her in the right-wing French press, and there's a campaign going on. So I guess she's a bit busy with things like that. She'll be with us as soon as she can. We also have Jérôme Bachelier, who's a member of La France Insoumise in Berlin, the same party as Danielle. The way this is going to work is that Jérôme's going to say something, then hopefully Danielle will be here and say her thing. Then there will be time for people to ask questions. If you are logged on at theleftberlin.com, if you look at the bottom right of your screen, there should be a button which says Ask a Question. If you click on that, you can type in any questions for Jérôme or Danielle. Type on those at any time. Jérôme's going to be the first of the speakers. So if you have any specific questions about what he's saying, then send a question while he's talking, and we can ask him directly afterwards. Otherwise, Danielle will come in and we'll take the questions at the end of things. A couple of things just before we get started. Say this is organised by the Linke Berlin Internationals group. We try and organise non-German leftists who are in Berlin. In the good old times, we organised a monthly meeting in the Roterladen in Friedrichshain. Because of COVID-19 and everything, we've had to go online, but this has had the opportunity as well that we can have international guests like Danielle taking part in our meeting. So the next meeting we'll let you know about. There's going to be a EU-China summit in Germany coming up, and there's a lot going on anyway. We'll give more information on that. The other thing which I can invite the Berliners to is that the weekend after next, on the 12th to 13th September, so Saturday and Sunday in a week, we have our annual summer camp. That's going to be the Naturfreundehaus Hermsdorf, which is a sort of youth hostel in Berlin Zone B. There's going to be speakers on all sorts of different things. We're there socially distanced for the whole weekend. You can find more about it on our website, theleftberlin.com, or by sending us a message. So everyone is warmly invited to come along and join in that discussion. Right, that's enough of me speaking. I'll bring Jérôme in now to talk about the first sentence of the rule of law in France. Jérôme, it was this meeting started from a suggestion Jérôme made a couple of months ago, when the Black Lives Matter movement was growing in France, growing in the US after the murder of George Floyd, and Jérôme was saying, "Hey, look at what's happening with the yellow vest after the murder of George Floyd," and Jérôme was saying, "Hey, look at what's happening with the yellow vests and with the people in the banlieue in France. It's not just an American thing." And so we decided to organise something about saying, okay, the Black Lives Matter movement in the US is very important. What's happening is extremely important, but there are similar things happening in other parts of the world. And I'll stop talking now and let Jérôme say it better than me. So Jérôme will just introduce us why we're doing this meeting and what it's important to know. On you go.
Thank you for the introduction, because it's really with what I want to start, to really mention the fact that what I was watching in the US in terms of police repression was very close to what we saw in France. The fact that journalists were arrested, that the police didn't have any immatriculation numbers on their uniforms. It was the same situation in France. I'm going to start to talk about the rule of law. The main concept is the separation of power. And then after, I'm going to go to the origin of the French Fifth Republic. And then I'm going to talk about the historical building of the French suburbs. And then we'll make a break to take some questions. And then we will go to the switch from the administrative justice, who actually took place in many cases, too many cases, to the judicial justice. So separation of power is based on executive power, legislative power, and judiciary power. The executive power executes and enforces the law and protects the constitution. The legislative power is a system of courts that interpret and applies law in legal cases. When we talk about this concept, we cannot talk about in a binary way. We have to think about intensity. If we look the First Republic of France, at the beginning, I would say the intensity in terms of separation of power and rule of law, it's medium. Compared to the German fundamental law, which is actually the German constitution, we can say it's much, much higher. And from this medium intensity in France, we went to a lower, very low intensity. And I'm going to try to show you, hopefully you're going to be convinced at the end. So the First Republic, oh, someone is calling me, coming from France, so it's probably Daniel. Okay, do you mind if I'm taking the phone?
Sure.
Sorry.
Okay. So, as Susan has said, that Danielle is very busy at the moment with campaigns against her, and that I believe there's going to be a demonstration in Paris next Saturday. So, hopefully, this is her saying she's going to be with us shortly. Bear with us. As said, this is a meeting organised by the Linke Berlin Internationals Group. We organise non-Germans in France politically. You can see more about us on the website, theleftberlin.com. And the weekend after next, we're organising a summer camp in Hermsdorf. If you want to know more about that, then just go to the website or go to our Facebook accounts, facebook.com/theleftberlin, TheLeftBerlin. In a minute, we will have Jerome back. Jerome's a member of France Insoumise in Berlin. He's also actively linked Internationals Group. He will hopefully be bringing Daniele Obono with him. Danielle is a French MP, former librarian, who at the moment is become involved in a huge scandal in France where right-wing newspapers have been drawing pictures of her as a slave. They'll say there is a protest movement against the way in which she's being treated. There are going to be actions in France in the coming in the coming weeks, and so we'll probably hear more from her about this. Just about how this works. If you have any questions, unfortunately, because of the way in which this is recorded, you're not able to come online, not come to the video and make any questions, but you are able to type in questions from our website, theleftberlin.com. At the bottom right, there is a red button which says ask a question. If you click on that button, you'll then get the opportunity to type in a question, and I will read that question out for you. You could depending on how many questions we get, we'll either take a series of them, asking to Danielle and Jerome, or they'll answer them individually. We'll just see how that one goes. Right. Hopefully, we're going to be hearing from Jerome. So as I said, if you just come in, Jerome has just gone offline. He's just called a phone call, which is hopefully Danielle saying she's on her way. She's been delayed because she's been very busy with everything that's going on in France and France in the moment. Yeah, and then I will. Okay, given as we've got time, I will say a little bit more about the summer camp we've got. It'll say it's the 12th and 13th of September. You can see information about it on our website. Just let you know some of the workshops which will be going on. We'll be having people speaking on next year's elections in Germany, on fair rents in Germany. We'll be having someone talking about 10 years of the Arab Spring and the more recent uprisings which have been happening in the Arab world. Someone from Poland talking about challenging the LGBT zones which have been set up there. A member of the Tech Workers Coalition talking about organising tech workers. It looks like Jerome is back. Jerome?
We are back.
So, okay, you're both here. Right. That's great. Hello, welcome, Danielle. I'm sure you are very, very busy at the moment. Want to offer you full solidarity in everything you're going through. People will be tired of listening to me going on. So, Jerome, let's go straight into what you were saying. Thank you,
okay.
And welcome.
Okay. So, the collapse of the Fourth Republic was the Algerian crisis in 1958. France was still a colonial power, and although conflict and revolt had begun the process of decolonization, Algeria in particular, despite being the colony with the largest French population, saw rising pressure for separation from metropolitan France. The situation was complicated by those in Algeria, such as European settlers and many native Jews who want to maintain the union with France. The Algerian War was not just a separatist movement, but had elements of a civil war. Further complication came when a section of the French army rebelled and openly backed the Algérie Française movement to defeat separation. Charles de Gaulle, who had retired from politics a decade before, placed himself in the midst of the crisis, calling on the nation to suspend the government and create a new constitutional system. De Gaulle was carried to power by the inability of the parliament to choose a government, popular protests, and the last parliament of the Fourth Republic voting for the dissolution and the convening of a constitutional convention. De Gaulle and his supporters proposed a system of strong presidents elected for 7 years through a college, like in Germany. The president under the proposed constitution would have executive power to run the country in consultation with the prime minister, whom he would appoint. On the 1st of June 1958, Charles de Gaulle was appointed head of government without any election. On June 1958, a constitutional law empowered the new government to draft a new constitution of France, and another law granted Charles de Gaulle and his cabinet the power to rule by decree for up to 6 months, except on certain matters related to the basic rights of citizens. These plans were approved by 80% of people who voted in the referendum in 1958. The constitution also replaced the French Union with the French Community, which allowed 14-member territory, excluding Algeria, to affect the independence. The president is now elected every 5 years, changed from 7 by a constitutional reform in 2000, to reduce the probability of cohabitation due to a formal difference in the length of term for the National Assembly and presidency. The president is elected in 1 or 2 rounds of voting. The politics of France take place with the framework of a semi-presidential system determined by the French Constitution of the French Fifth Republic. The nation declared itself to be indivisible, secular, democratic, and a social republic. The Constitution provides for a separation of power and proclaims France's attachment to the right of man and the principle of national sovereignty as defined by the Declaration of 1789. The political system of France consists of an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. Executive power is exercised by the President of the Republic and the government. The government consists of the Prime Minister and Minister. The constitution was changed in July 2008 during Sarkozy's mandate. The bill regulated the role of the executive and augmented the parliament's power. And during this change as well, defender of right is created. The defender of right watch over respect for rights and liberties by state administration, local authority, and public establishment. So maybe I make already a break here. Maybe Daniel want to say something about the origin of the Fifth Republic, and then I will talk about how the judicial courts and the administrative courts and the Constitution Council.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. Good. Is it okay?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all first for inviting me to this conversation. I think it's very telling when you talk about the political system in France, how it came to exist in this actual iteration, how the Fifth Republic happened, actually. And it shows that despite what we may sometimes believe ourselves as French people, as if the Republic system is somehow coming from glorious ideas and theoretical and the Lumiere history. It's very much the expression, just like Marx said, about the base and superstructure. It's a reflection of power struggle, of class struggle, and especially with this very specific republic, the fact that it came from a colonial war. Actually, it's the reaction to a colonial war that make this system happen. So from the very start, it had all the elements of power struggle, and also rooted into French attempt to keep its former colonies under its rule. And you had the intersection of this political power and political struggle, and also the colonial aspect and the racial aspect of this republic is very much at the beginning of its birth. So I think it's very telling, and Jerome showed it in its introduction to the matter.
Okay. Do you want to take a run of questions already, Philippe, or I go?
No, there are, to remind people, if you'd like to ask a question, there's a button bottom right, ask a question of your screen. That's, no one has sent in questions yet. I've got some questions which I'll ask later, but if you carry on and if questions come in, then I'll ask them when they arrive.
Okay, so now I'm going to go to the topic of the justice and the different institutions. The judicial courts in France, the independent judiciary power is based upon civil law system which evolved from the Napoleonic Code. It is divided into a judicial branch dealing with civil law and criminal law, and the administrative branch dealing with appeal against executive decision, each with their own independent Supreme Court of Appeal, the Court of Cassation for the judicial court, and the Conseil d'État for the administrative court. Judges are government employees, but are granted special statutory protection from the executive. Judges have security of tenure and may not be promoted or demoted without the consent. The careers are overseen by the Judicial Council of France. The public prosecutor, the administrative justice, on the other hand, take order from the Minister of Justice. In the past, this has bred suspicion of undue political pressure to dismiss suit or claim against government officials charged with corruption in the statute of public prosecutor, and the ties to government are frequently topic of debate. It is actually the debate of tonight. The Constitution Court, neither judicial nor administrative court, are empowered to rule on the constitution of Act of Parliament. So this constitution, this court is actually looking if the law passed by the government or the decrees from the president are going in the frame of the constitutional court of the French constitution. The Constitution Council may declare acts to be unconstitutional even if they contradict the principle of the 1789 Declaration of Right of Man. The members are appointed for 9 years, 3 every 3 years. 3 are appointed by the president, 3 by the president of the National Assembly, and 3 by the president of the Senate. The former president are also members for life of the Constitutional Council. If you see this constitution in the US or in Germany, the people who are sitting in this constitution are judges, not in France. They are politicians for most of them. Traditionally, decision-making in France is highly centralized, which is and the person who is in charge of security is the prefect. The prefect is in charge of the coordination of the police and the gendarmerie forces. So now I'm going to go to the historic origin of the suburbs. The French suburbs, unlike the Anglo-Saxon suburbs, which are the white middle class, were created at the end of the 19th century to house the working classes. The project is to homogenize a new capital city by generalizing urban facility, particularly the metro, to relieve the demographic pressure from the center ultra to transfer industry beyond the fortification to the periphery. The suburbs were left to their own device, annual by the public authorities. The open space accommodate warehouse, light-scale industry. Wages in the suburbs are lower than in Paris. Discipline is harsher. Tailorization is earlier than in the Parisian or Lyon workshop. 1935 marked a turning point in the history of the Parisian suburbs. 26 municipalities passed to a communist mayor. The German-Soviet Pact, the Cold War, and the coalition only temporarily weakened the Red Belt, a social political construction that lasts until the end of the 80s. And actually, in the last election in 2017, a lot of MP from the France Insoumise won in this district. So we can say that a lot of this Red Belt came back in the last election somehow. In the context of the baby boom, the beginning of economic growth and the reception of provincial and foreign immigration, the urban population increased. The industrialization of the building industry led to a preference for simple shapes. So for people who are in Berlin, the building in the suburbs are very similar to what you can see in Marzahn or Lichtenberg. But actually, it went so fast that they didn't plan any collective facility as public transport, for example. The house population is composed of French families, middle and senior managers. Often provincial immigrants, they are joined by population of repatriates from the decolonization of the French Empire. But the poorest, the very large family, foreign and immigrant population are housed elsewhere in slums, for example. In Saint-Denis, one of the most famous suburbs in France, in Paris, in 1960s, the industrial sector accounted for 46% of jobs, compared with 44% in the tertiary sector. In 1990s, the industrial sector accounted for 21% and the tertiary sector for 72%. Entire sectors disappearing, metallurgy, machine tools, chemistry, whose presence structures the workers' companies. The economic crisis that began in 1953, the global devaluation of labor and half a century of decentralization led to the disappearance of the industrialized suburbs. As a result of the oil shocks and the onset of the economic crisis, the government is implementing a new immigration policy. Close the border, assisted return for foreign deemed responsible for the crisis, maintaining the numbers of foreigners, and authorizing family reunification. This policy, launched under the socialist government, led to a decree in 19 April 1976, relating to the condition of entry and residence of family members. The integration of families require housing conditions similar to those of French workers. As a result, the landscape of the working class suburbs had undergone major change. The 255 Cheney town in metropolitan France, including 120 in the Paris region, which housed 50,000 immigrants, have been reabsorbed, and the population relocated to large social housing estates. Social housing is being opened up in a very proactive way to foreign families, which is hoped, which will bring them up to the suburban living standard of French society. The organizations that manage the social housing estate welcome this new tenant. But at the same time, a new law makes the most modest families solvent. The idea is to distribute immigrant family among French households according to quotas of around 15%, but the community reunification, which were never thought or not anticipate. North African family became the majority in Les Minguettes, suburbs in Paris, during the 1970s. In Saint-Denis, the foreign school population increased from 17% to 30% between 1975 and 1983. And in 1992, 74% of North African households were tenants in low-rent housing. At the same time, as this population were arriving in this district, France was emptying of its industry. So, Daniel, if you want to say something about this situation, which is actually the end of the 20th century.
I won't have much about the description. I would like more to emphasize what it meant, and also why it's part of also a political dynamic. What it meant for French society. I think the development of the suburbs has been part of the growth of working class in France, and it's very telling because the first generation of those post-colonial era migrants were sent to the suburbs at first with and that created this culture of this working class culture. But at the beginning, they were living in actual slums, and it's part of this process of France needing workforce that created this much more mixed working class, and it's also it's been part of the social movement, because from the very beginning there have been resistance, very little known about, because this is not part of history that has been very much researched, and people were not very interested that social movements and anti-racist groups have been doing the work, and showed and more academics are really focusing on that, how from very beginning those people have been fighting against discrimination in the factories, and also in the city, how they organized to create this working class culture in the suburbs. That is also a form of resistance against both exploitation and racism. I think it's very important to also show that, and to talk about it, because it showed that that was not a process, a new unilateral process. There have always been for these post-colonial migrants that became French, that migrate to France, and all the previous ways of migrant that became French and were discriminated against, with the specificity that for those population, they've been subjected to acute racism, to police violence from the very beginning, but they also resisted. That's the point I wanted to add to your presentation.
Do you have any questions, Philip?
Well, I have a question. There's no questions in, but and it relates to suburbs and it relates to two films. 25 years ago, we saw the release. Sorry, there's sirens outside. But we saw the release of Maciej Kasiewicz's La Haine, which was seen as being a shocking story about life in the suburbs, about racism, police repression, and also resistance from the people inside the suburbs about banlieue. This year there was a release of Les Miserables, was the French title, which showed exactly the same thing. It says the repression is still there, the police attacks on migrants are still there, but also the resistance is there. And it goes to the question, you said how the suburbs came into being. Have things changed in terms of conditions there? And have things changed on the terms of how people within the banlieue are reacting? For either of you.
Okay. Should I? I
I
can.
didn't watch the movie Les Miserables, so I cannot talk about it.
Oh, you should.
Yeah.
Maybe I can. What I think interesting with this comparison is that Les Miserables has been produced, has been directed actually by a black man, an Afro-French black man, and I think it shows both. It shows two things to me. This comparison shows two things to me. First thing is that what is being denounced in the film, among other things, are the same that had been happening for the past 20, 30 years and even before. And of course, it shows some lack of progress in French society. But I think it's interesting also to show that there's been a change of who is speaking about it. I think it's very important to show that the narrative voice in Les Miserables is very much from the point of view of the people who are directly concerned by the issue. I think La Haine was directed and produced by Maciej Kasiewicz's, who did a brilliant job. But I think it's what was very revolutionary, which shouldn't be, but was very, very revolutionary in France, is that it was the work of one of those kids, and so you see the expression of those generation of French people, young French people, who are discriminated against, but who are more and more vocal about it in their area of work. And it's whether it's in film, but you have people in the news, in journalism, and more people who are like very vocal about their experience, not just about racism or violence, but that's I think a very interesting development in the past 20 years. But of course, the most shocking thing is that it's the 20 years later, we're still facing the same realities. And it's you could say the same thing about the US in terms of police brutality and the lack of progress in that sense. Yet I think the movement we witnessed, whether in the US or in France, against police brutality, against violence, against racism, shows the resistance that have been building, and that is expressing also. Thanks.
Would you like to add anything, Jerome?
Oh yeah, actually, I mean, in terms of music, by the same time we have the success of La Haine, there were already some very successful albums. I think about the album of I Am, L'école du micro d'argent. and in one song of L'école du micro d'argent, he really mentioned the fact that this topic of the suburbs and the insecurity topic, Akhenaton, who is a singer of I Am, really mentioned the fact that insecurity and the violence have been always there. It has been always there. It's just the fact it came in the media. Every 10, 50 years, I will say that it's coming in the media. But now the change for me is really the fact that the administrative justice is really taking in charge the justice in the suburbs, and now taking all the people from lower social class, they judge them. They are the construction of a second justice, and now is what I'm going to talk about it. And it starts from my opinion, it starts at the beginning of the first century, especially when the president term's office changed from 7 years to 5 years. And the presidents become the head of the executive, leading de facto to the end of the separation of the power between the legislative power and the executive power. On the one hand, the suburbs are facing mass unemployment resulting from the policy of desindustrialization like no other country will experience. On the other hand, the police force that is facing downsizing due to austerity policy, and that has never looked back its responsibility in the repression of Algerians that led to the October 1961 tragedy, when hundreds of Algerians were murdered by the police under the order of Maurice Papon, tried in 1997 for a crime against humanity for his responsibility in the deportation of Jews between 1942 and 1943. In 2005, a police blunder led to the riots that led to the establishment of the state of emergency. The state of emergency gives power to the administrative justice to arrest and incarcerate individuals suspected of illegal acts more quickly. It actually gives extraordinary power to the police and to the administrative justice. During this period, the Minister of the Interior, Nicolas Sarkozy, stood up as the personification of the establishment to campaign for the presidency. The communication operation will be successful in 2007. In the face of the social crisis, the state's response with repression and the use of new weapons, a new police force dedicates to the suburbs. In 1994, a former high-ranking civil servant in the colonies created an anti-crime brigade named La BAC, with specific methods and weapons. Some new lethal weapons were tested in this territory for later use for the law enforcement during demonstration. Facial control exposed in these territories, the defenders of rights, a post created to control freedom without any power than adversary in 2008, judged that young men perceived as Black or Arab are 20 times more likely to be controlled. The number of police plunder and deaths explodes in an almost general indifference. In 2006, 140 complaints were filed with the National Ethics and Security Commission. By 2018, the Defenders of Rights who replaced the Commission had received 1,520 complaints. The name of the deaths are explicit: Mohamed Gapsi, Cédric Chouviat, Ibrahim Abba, Steve Maria Canisso, Sined Rodois, Henri L'Enfant, Aboubakar Fofana, Gay Camara, Selon Emetis, Louise Bicot, Jérôme Larose, Youssa Oyo, Adama Traoré, and the children who died in 2005, Tined Bena and Bouna Traoré, who ran away from the police because they were scared from the police. The majority of the victims were Black or Arab. In the majority of cases, the investigation were given to judge rely on the administrative justice. In the other words, investigation is given to a body that depends on the same ministry, the same administration. There is therefore no independence and no respect for the separation of power. In November 2015, after the Paris terrorist attacks, the socialist President Hollande declared a state of emergency. During this period, environmental activists and trade unionists were victims of a terrible repression. Many were under house arrest during the United Nations Climate Change Conference demonstration in 2015. 2016, demonstration against the labor law, La Loi El Khomri, will see a change in law enforcement strategy. Weapons used in the suburbs will not be used against demonstration, and many trade unionists will be deprived of their right to demonstrate because of house arrest. These weapons are flashball, flashbang, explosive tear gas grenade. But it is during the movement of the Yellow Vests that the violence of this device will explode. In the meantime, the new President Macron is going to put a new nail in the coffin of the rule of law. The anti-terrorist bill is officially intended to take over from the exceptional regime in force in France since November 2015. By then, the law strengthening internal security and the fight against terrorism will have transposed into an ordinary law for administrative measure ordered by a prefect or the Interior Ministry on the basis of information often provided by the intelligence services in form of a brief white note that are neither dated nor signed. Administrative search have been renamed house visit, during which seizure may be carried out. Unlike the state of emergency, the new form of administrative search must be authorized by a judicial judge, who will take his decision based on the administrative investigation. Another key measure of the state emergency is the transformation of house arrest into an obligation to reside within a certain perimeter. The draft law also provides for the possibility for prefect to continue to establish a protection zone, within which law enforcement agencies have exceptional power to control individuals. In the draft law, this zone becomes protection perimeters. However, the derogation from ordinary law remains the same. Finally, the fourth measure of the state of emergency imported into ordinary law is that prefect will be available to order the closure of religious places. In 2018, following a fuel tax that comes on top of all the law weakening the most underprivileged social classes, tens of thousands of French people will block the country. Dressed in yellow vests, they will demonstrate in the city center of medium-sized and large towns. Faced with determination and non-organization, the law enforcement will turn into an historic repression. The lack of manpower, training, and sometimes bad ammunition will lead to a number of unprecedented police blunders in modern history. The methods were intended to sow fear and panic among the demonstrators. They are sometimes surrendered and gazed without the possibility of leaving a given area. Brigades used in the suburb are going to use for lack of manpower against the yellow vests. For example, La BAC will be used during this demonstration. So the casualty were 4,438 injured, 344 head injuries, 29 with hand torn off. And in terms of arrestation, we have 2,000 people arrested, 10,718 police custody were injured probably, and 300,000 conviction. And we have right now, still today, I'm thinking about 400 people in jail from this movement. And actually, during the last summer camp, Jean-Luc Mélenchon mentioned that there were 800. So I don't know actually about the numbers. So that's it for me. So if there are any questions, or if Daniel wants to add something about this very sad direction that our justice took, no? I mean, if you can add something about that.
Yeah, I think I wanted to point that what we witnessed, of course, there's been the repression, and I think it showed how deeply the Macron regime was being shocked and shook by the movement. We've never witnessed such a level of repression in France. We've had a long history of social movements and radical social movements. We are a revolutionary country. We have a revolutionary history. Yet it's unprecedented in the history of the Fifth Republic, and we're talking about Fifth Republic, as you said at the beginning, that was born out of colonial war, an attempted coup of the state, and also we had in '68 this massive working class and student social movement. And it's interesting at the time because there were the level of restriction was very important at the time. We sometimes forget about that. Those what happened in cities like Paris, and with a lot of clash with between the police and striking workers and students and stuff. And at the same time, the strategy of the power at the time was that not to push too far the confrontations. They actually acknowledge the fact that the level of confrontation was dictated by the state, actually, and they actually backed down because it was the politics and the regime at the time realized that they were aiding into a massive confrontation, because of course there was the working class strike, and it was and it plays a lot in the way the regime didn't temper down, tone down the repression. And when you compare with what happened with the Yellow Vest movement, you really realize that it's the will of the regime. Macron decided to use a brute police force to suppress the Yellow Vest movement. That's the only tool he had, because he's lacking legitimacy. For the past 3 years, he showed himself as the president of the wealthy, as we nicknamed him, and this nickname that we created in La France Insoumise now is widespread, because he actually turned out to be this guy, and he also turned out to be quite an authoritarian president, in the sense that he fully embraced all of the most authoritarian characteristic of the Fifth Republic, what we call this Republican monarchy, and because it was a regime that was born out of, as I say, a coup and a war, a colonial war, and it was tailor-made for the General de Gaulle, and with the very horizontal hierarchy and this type of ruling, and it always had this problematic dynamics in it. And now we coming to the end. I think this republic, this style of government of this presidential monarchy is actually dying, because it's too removed from the way things should be in a time of citizen struggle and democratic crisis. This is what we are advocating for in La France Insoumise, is a new constitution, a constitutional process that will show that will reform the republic, and we have a sixth republic that actually is actually more democratic system. So you had Macron, which is this kind of is ridicule of this self appointed monarch, and people, when the Yellow Vest movement called, and there is this very revolutionary tradition that was revived by the Yellow Vest movement, when they said they want to go to l'Élysée to take down the king, actually, and it has all those themes that you found in the movement. It's very striking. And the last thing I wanted to add about that, and the dynamic of police repression and crumbling Fifth Republic, but the connection between the Yellow Vest movement and the anti-racist movement, and those populations that have been subjected to police repression for a long time without much support from the working class struggle of the left, and the experience of such a repression of a mass scale, and the way the Yellow Vest movement had been been repressed, actually created, I think, the basis of a much stronger solidarity in social movements and a bigger awareness of what the racialized people in France and Black and brown and people of color in France have been have been brutalized by police force and by the state, and also so those are also in this period I think signs that there is new alliances that can be built. Sorry for being a bit too long about that.
No, in fact, you preempted my next question, which would be good if you could go in a bit more. You've so far you've both been talking about two different movements and two different forms of repression. First, there's the movement in the banlieue and the repression, which has a very racial element, and then there's the yellow vest movements, which certainly the way it's been reported in Germany is being reported as being a very white movement, a movement which the Rassemblement National have tried to infiltrate or tried to influence. And so it'd be nice if you both of you could say about more how are these movements coming together. But another question: how has the Black Lives Matter movement in France? How has that been taken by the Gilets jaunes? And has there been any interaction there? You may either of you.
Yeah.
Well, the only thing I can say that actually that at the end of November or at the beginning of December, the collective Justice pour Adama. So Adama Traoré is one of these victims of the police, who was a very strong and very, I would say, is very important in terms of mediatic presence and social network as well. They call 3 weeks after the beginning of the Yellow Vest to support them, and I think 2 weeks after, or maybe 1 week after. No, let's be honest. I think 2 weeks after, they were anti-Semites, they were racist, they were, I don't know, they were violent, of course. So those people have the right to be all the bad things. So that was actually a mediatic strategy in France and, of course, all around the world, because it's the best way to get rid of mobilization like that is to accuse them of anti-Semitism, racist, and everything. That's clear.
Danielle, do you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe about the way the Yellow Vest movement has been portrayed, but also the way, I mean, we had the same attacks on the anti-racist movement that has been attempts by the press and the state to disqualify both movements on pretty much the same ground, being anti-Semite or so. And I think it's important to remind people that actually the Yellow Vest movement started out from a petition that was launched by a Black woman, Priscilla Ludowski, and that garnered over hundreds of signature, and that's actually what sparked the movement, and people got into it because it spoke about their lives, and they actually identify with themselves with that call for action, and it's interesting that how Priscilla Ludowski has been erased of her own movement, and the movement she pretty much started. And also there have been connections. As I said, the experience of state violence actually connected the movement, created awareness. And I think the way the movement against police brutality, against structural racism started in France, in the wake of in the aftermath of the Yellow Vest movement, was also made possible because of what happened during that that last year because of the Yellow Vest movement. The fact that seeing the image of black bodies being brutalized sparked such an emotional reaction because of we've been seeing police videos of police brutality for months, and the general opinion, the public opinion has been really sensitive about that issue. So I think there's actual connection between the movement and the fact that this movement was actually supported by the majority of the population. So it's those are, I think, very. I mean, the outrage starts from the same places. It's both are protests against injustice, structural injustice, social and racial injustice, and I think that's what makes it interesting to see how we managed to build alliance between those movements and to see what will happen next, because none of those crises have been resolved. The Yellow Vest movement's demands are still very much relevant and have not been answered. So it's still and even the COVID-19 crisis adding an extra layer of unrest and discontent, in a very contradictory way, but the way the government has been also reacting to that is very criticized. So I think we are still in this moment of unrest and instability in France, and those two movements, the Yellow Vest movement and the anti-racist, anti-police brutality movement, are really part of this social movement, very strong. And even though it's more toned down from now, I think any sparkle can just make it explode again into the street, or in one way or another. And I wanted just to add a last thing about the Yellow Vest movement. People, what was striking for me, especially in the context of a very of systemic racism in France and of media life, where the idea of the far right are much more widespread. It was very striking that the main demands of the Yellow Vest movement were not about migrants. You had the far right who tried to pressure and to push the movement into that direction. That was for sure, because it was composed of a different type of people, but they didn't succeed. And from the beginning to the end, the main demands were about social justice, and there were also some demand about an anti-racist demand that came on top of the demands of the movement, what emerged of the demand of the movement. So to me, it's a sign of something that said that it's something powerful happening. It's not driven by any organized force for now. We supported both movements, and La France Insoumise was one of the only movement that was actually defending and supporting both of those movements, because I mean there were people's movement actually, and they're still, to me, the source of very much hope for the future in France, in our political fight for equality and for another world.
Okay, thanks, Liz. We've got a question in from the public, just people who are watching this. You can put questions in. You go to where this is being shown on the leftberlin.com and press the red button at the bottom right, which says ask a question, I seem to remember. This question, I don't have a name, but it comes from Whitley Bay in the United Kingdom. And the questioner says, very interesting meeting. Could the comrades say something about the role of trade union leaders in the coming months? Are they supporting Black Lives Matter and workers' movements? So a question, what are the French trade union leaders doing at the moment? Does either want to take this?
Danielle, I think she knows much better than me the situation in France, especially about this topic.
Yeah, I think the trade union movement. I mean, we didn't speak about a third social movement had happened over the past year, which is the anti-pension reform movement that has been also very oppressive. Strikes and demonstration happening. So just that remind me that in the span of 3 years, we had the most massive popular revolt we've witnessed with the Yellow Vest movement, working class mobilization, and anti-racist movements. So we actually managed. I mean, no, we didn't. COVID-19 managed to put an out and to the pension reform, which was anti-worker, which was a neoliberal reform that intended to privatize the social security and pension system. And there was this combination of demonstration and strike, especially railway workers who went on strike, very hard strike, and actually right now we're witnessing a backlash with the anti-trade unions repression happening in the transport system, in the transport sector against workers and strikers during the reform anti-pension reform movement. Yet we have this very strong movement. That shows you that the dynamics of class struggle, which intertwine, all those dynamic, all those sectors of the movement, and you have actually yellow vest people who went to support the strike, who demonstrated against the pension reform, and who also demonstrated against police brutality. So you have connection. The problem we faced, I think, between the Yellow Vest movement and the anti-pension reform movement is that actually I think the trade union leadership missed an historic opportunity back in December 2019, at the moment where the regime was really weakened by the rising dynamic of the Yellow Vest movement, and at that moment there were a lot of discussion about whether there will be a call for strike to support the demands, the progressive demands of the Yellow Vest movement, and that opportunity was actually missed, and so. The movement happened a couple of months later around the pension reform and the opposition of the pension reform. But so I think there's a lot of discussion into trade unions right now, and to assess what has been happening and why that opportunity was missed, and how part of the people who went, who actually were part of the Yellow Vest movement, were very critical of trade unions, and it's I think it's a very learning experience from rank and file, but also for some part of the leadership. All the political trade unions. Social movements in France have been impacted by the populist, in the sense of out of any organized, traditional organized structure, nature of the Yellow Vest movement. And we've been trying to create connection and build solidarity between all that has been happening. And I think it's still underworks. I think it's still being debated, and more than that, the question is how now do we connect with all those people and create the next time that will happen. We don't know when, but it will happen. As I say, the situation is still very uncertain. We actually come together, all of us, Yellow Vest, and the youth and the workers, to whether it's on the strike, the social movement, or during the elections. How do we make it an actual force that challenge the state and the regime, and the Macron regime? I don't know if it's answering the question, but
well,
those are
I have a follow-up question on exactly that, which is, you talked about the different movements, what's happening in the banlieue, what's happening with the Yellow Vests, what's happening in pension plans and things like that. I'd just like, so Danielle, you're an MP for La France Insoumise, and Jérôme, you're active in France Insoumise in Berlin. In terms of you bringing these things together, what do you see as being the role of France Insoumise? What has France Insoumise got to offer all these different people involved in different campaigns?
Well, for one, I'm gonna try to be short about it, because obviously I don't have the distance to actually have a fair assessment of it. But from where I'm standing, I think what we've managed to do is actually support the movement. That was not a given. I mean, now when people talk about the Yellow Vest movement, everybody recognize the importance of this movement, but it was not a given, and the movement had been portrayed in a very bad light and bad way, and we had to fight alongside, and we supported it, and I think it was a turning point, because especially when the repression started, and we've been targeted for this, because we've been said to be anti-police and all, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a very important role to be the one standing with the people who are leading the movement, who are building the movement, who are the movement, standing with the social movements. We also actually push the fight against the pension reform into the institution, because we actually are the reason why the process was altered in the parliament, because we had this we had thousands of amendments on the bill that made it impossible for them to actually do the reading of the bill on time, and that's the reason why they had to use an executive order to push through, which showed their weakness, and that's one of the reasons why they were so late in their timetable, and they had to stop, and all the process actually stopped because they were running out of time, and then the COVID-19 crisis happened. And what I mean is that we had the capacity, even though we are a small parliamentary group, to combine with the movement and to defeat, actually, even though it's temporary, to defeat the plans of the government, and we'll also be in part in supporting the anti police brutality movement. So I would say that it doesn't automatically translate into, for instance, electoral gains, because what we saw also is that on the electoral plan, on the electoral field, people actually still abstain for engaging. We had the highest level of abstention during the last spring local government election, which happened in the midst of a pandemic, which was from the beginning a very bad idea. And usually those type of elections are the one, with the exception of the presidential election, which has a decent turnout. But we had now the lowest turnout that has been registered for those elections. So we're still in this crisis of electoral and democratic crisis happening. But I think what we managed to be to bridge, to be a bridge, and to be and to be a voice inside the institutions of the movement. I think it's been important, because we also need to rebuild connection inside the social movements, and to strengthen the social movement. And we've been allies to the social movement in that regard. And I think it's what activists and revolutionary needs to be useful at. We are at the service of the movement, and we will, and we that's what we've been trying to do, and I think we actually succeed in that sense to strengthen the movement and to help the movement gain those temporary success in terms of shaking the Macron regime.
Jerome, as a France Insoumise activist, do you want to add anything to this about what France Insoumise is doing?
Well, actually, I think 18 months ago, already during the Yellow Vest movement, Jean-Luc Mélenchon suggested to organize a kind of federation to try to put every union, association, political party we want to get rid of the government. It didn't succeed. Then after, Mélenchon, in 2 interviews in Libération, suggests to work on a government agreement. Till now, we didn't have any answer from any political party. And in the last summer camp, we suggest to work on common goal. So it's very, frustrating, because we try to move on with a social movement, and what we see is different political parties and different organizations don't really want to work together. And somehow, it's what I see, because if you look at socially, the country is boiling. Already 6 months ago, it was already a very bad situation for the government. And now, with what's going on, what is going to happen, I'm wondering what is going to happen, because it was a kind of a civil war with the Yellow Vest, and we went to this pension reform was disaster for the executive in terms of communication. Then Macron decided to change his government, and actually the topic tonight was about justice and law enforcement, and the Minister of Justice and the entire minister have been kicked out. So it's a very, very strange time. There are some communication to try to pretend that things are going to change, but of course we see it in the different decision from the government. It's still the same politic. It's giving a lot of money to private corporation, and he asked us to work even longer than before. So I think the social situation in France is very bad, and I won't be surprised if the Yellow Vests are coming out and Well, we will see. But I'm very pessimistic in the next months what is going to happen in France. Actually, the main topic is probably what the police is going to do, because I think at some point it's impossible to stay in a country where the only answer is a repression. I mean, at some point it's impossible. Of course, at the end of the year, I mean, not at the end, but in December 2018, I think, he give some, I think, 1 billion of euros, something like this, to try to solve the problem, but didn't solve the problem at all, because the inequalities in France are so high, and the disindustrialization of the country, like we saw during the COVID-19, is dramatic. It's dramatic. We didn't have any mask. Probably like in Great Britain, we didn't have anything. The workers didn't have any masks, didn't have any things to walk, and the government, like Obono said, Daniel said, the government was giving some information, and then 2 weeks after was giving the opposite decision. So it was like this during months and months. It's disaster in terms of politics since months and months, not only socially but as well in terms of communication and in terms of leadership.
Okay, thanks. I've now got a specific question around Black Lives Matter in France. What I think has been inspirational in the last few months is that Black Lives Matter in the States have just kept at it. In Germany, we had a couple of demonstrations and kind of died down. The anger is still there, but the idea of mobilization. And the mobilizations in the States are going on, and the whole discussion about defunding the police has become a serious issue, which has been pushed through in Seattle, as being discussed worldwide. How is the situation in France? Does Black Lives Matter still exist as an organisation which is doing things? It exists as a mood in people's mind. How are things going? Maybe Danielle, you're more centrally involved.
Actually, friends, there's not such thing of the Black Lives Matter movements. It's more, as I said previously, the anti-police brutality movement. It's not labeled as Black Lives Matter. It's been a movement of resisting and opposing and denouncing police brutality for decades. It's not something new. As the projects in the US are not new. They're like coming from a long history of resistance from the people affected by that state violence. In France, you can date it back to police repression and state repression, but in the second half of the 20th century, in the late 70s and early 80s, and especially in 1983, about this big movement against police brutality that translated in a big demonstration, a big march throughout the country, and what's called the March for Equality and against police brutality. That meant that it was not just about state repression, but also social and economic inequality. And I think what has been happening over the past years, and that also were boosted by the echo of the U.S. Black Lives Matter movement, when we saw thousands of young people, mostly young people, unexperienced in activism at all, but a very diverse crowd of demonstrators that gathered in early June in front of the courts in Paris to support the fight of Assa and the Traoré family, demanding justice for the death of Adama Traoré. And then 10 days later, in the streets of Paris, the state actually forbade the demonstration to happen, but the thousands gathered Place de la République to show support to the anti-police brutality movement and to all the family movements that have been struggling for years without any public acknowledgement, without any media attention, but fighting for justice. So those were very powerful movements, and what we call the rebirth of the anti-racist movement, because we hadn't witnessed such a movement for years. And it was very welcoming. And I think so. What I wanted to emphasize is that the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement in the U.S. Certainly played a part in boosting this movement. But as I said, also what has been happening in France in the past 3 years. The Yellow Vest movement, the anti-pension reform movement, played also a part, and of course, and also the COVID-19 all situation, and the way the government has been mishandling the response to it. So you got this situation where new generations are now leading the anti-racist movement, and it's very refreshing and it's very welcomed because those are the people directly affected by and there's a very strong sense of autonomy and the need and the call to organize, to self-organize, and not depend on external organization. But we've been building collaboration, because at the same time of those movements were like growing, we've been in the parliament, we've been voicing their demand, we've been pushing forward a proposal of legislation to halt police brutality and out the use of lethal weapons and techniques. So we've been building this collaboration inside the institution, and we've been marching onto the street with them. So that's what to me, it's a very inspiring movement, and I think there's a lot of more to come, because the repressive response didn't work, and the demands need to be answered, and people are still won't be silenced, and there's a strong sense of strength and dignity, and the fact that we won't be silenced, we won't be terrorized by the state, and so there's a lot more to come, I think, in the next month, in the term of anti-racist movement growing and fighting back.
Okay, thanks. To let people know, we will start to wind up soon enough. The online meetings are a bit more strenuous than others. You've still got a chance to send last questions to Danielle or Jerome by pressing the Ask a Question button bottom right on your screen at theleftberlin.com. I have a question which you may not want to answer either, but I wonder if either of you has anything to say about Danielle's case at the moment. People who don't know, a right-wing French magazine has published a racist sketch of Danielle, which has caused outrage. Is there anything you'd like to say about this, or would you rather just not talk about it?
I can say a few words, even though it's still very much happening, and it's always difficult in this situation to have a clear sense of what what will be the effects of that. But what I can say for now is that these far right publications actually sparked an outrage and a massive reaction and a lot of support from the widest range of people possible, from complete anonymous people that send thousands of support messages on the internet to Emmanuel Macron, who actually publicly said that he was denouncing the publication. I think uh, it's been 3 years since I've been elected that I've been the subject of harassment from far right, from um, racist and sexist people because of racism and sexism and the way people of color, especially women of color and Black women, have been have been um, so few of us in the public light, and when there's some public figure we've been subjected to a lot of violence and symbolical violence, and from the media, from the entire system. So it's part of a long line of racism directed toward the most visible um people people of color in the media and in politics. I think it's also an expression of what has been happening, and I touched a little bit about on that previously. In France, over the past 20 years, far right ideas have really gained legitimacy in the media and in politics. We call it le pénisation. The process of, there's been a massive ideological and cultural offensive of the far right, who actually won some cultural battles, like when they kept pushing for anti-migrant legislation, for, there've been all those debates about migrants and anti-white racism and stuff like that, and they became like mainstream. And those ideas, which used to be only on the far right, some of them became really mainstream, and I think that's why people that wrote that piece in this paper felt very free and very comfortable to do that, to me, especially since I'm from La France Insoumise. So that's I think that's what's been happening, and now there's been, like, with the anti-war movement, with the anti-racist movement, there have been uh, even more tension about those issues, because France had to deal with its own history of racism, from slavery to nowadays, and there have been resistance inside, inside the society, inside political force, to face this. So this is the context I wanted to explain a little bit about the context in which those attacks, those vicious attacks happened, and the fact that I think the reaction to that, the support, I've been very moved to have from thousands of people, showed also that yeah, people are fighting back, and there's a strong tradition of anti-racist and anti-fascist resistance in France, not just from activists, but inside the society. And I think it's very important that after so many years where the far right has been able to infiltrate the mainstream, there's some fight back against that, and people are saying, like, enough is enough. We can't let them keep doing that, and so we'll see. Of course, it won't magically change. The government is still having this strategy to try to push for, talk about migration, talk about, supporting police brutality, and they are making everything. I mean, they are implementing the policy that the far right is advocating at the time, and that's what is the more problematic in the situation. But I think it's a small victory that we managed to have after being so viciously attacked, and the fact that there's still resistance to that in society, and this resistance is very strong. And yeah, that's.
Thanks. And we'd like to offer you our full international solidarity. We were contacted by a freelance journalist today who wants to cover your case more in the German left press, and we hope that people will find out and be able to support you as they can. Jerome, is there anything you want to say to this point? You may say no, or you may say yes.
No, I'm fine. I'm totally. What you say is exactly.
Okay, so I think this is a good time to wrap up. In a minute, I will give Danielle and Jerome and Danielle the chance to say anything they've forgotten to say about anything else. Just quickly to remind you, this has all been organised by the Berlin Linker Internationals. We do this on roughly a monthly basis. Obviously, COVID conditions make things a bit more difficult. If you'd like to know about other events which are coming up, then you can subscribe to our newsletter, go to the website, theleftberlin.com, and fill in your email address. Bottom left where it says sign up for Berlin news and events. We also, the weekend after next, we're having our summer camp on the edge of Berlin. Please get in touch with us for more information. It's free with a lot of workshops and all sorts of other things. That's enough from me, I think. So I'd just like to bring in first Jerome and then Danielle, if there's anything last you'd like to say, and then we'll close the meeting.
Well, thank you for the left to organize this meeting, and thank you to Danielle to participate, to take the time, especially now, to be there tonight. Thank you to all of you.
And Danielle, last word from you.
Oh, I won't add much. I've been talking way too long already, and just thanking you for this conversation and for the support you expressed, and hopefully we'll have other opportunity to keep building the relationship and the international European coordination and solidarity and strategy we need also to build and make not in each country but also in Europe the social movement and the political alternative win our fights for social equality and environmental justice and anti-racist struggle. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll speak soon and we'll see soon.
Okay, thanks once again to both of you. Thanks to Anthony, who behind the scenes has been doing all the technical things. Hopefully we'll have recorded this and we'll put a tape of this meeting on the website as soon as we can. Thanks for everybody who took part in the discussion. Everyone has just been listening. The question about the trade unions, I got message later, was from Ian McGregor from Newcastle SWP. Thank you for that, Ian. And I think that's it for today. Let's call this a wrap. Goodbye, everybody.